The bug that made me rich, an accidental revenge story. Let me tell you about the time I accidentally destroyed my toxic startup and became Silicon Valley's revenge engineer legend. I never meant for any of it to happen. I'm just a regular coder who follows the rules, documents his work, and keeps his head down. Well, I was. But as my grandma used to say, even a doormat has its day. Part 1, the all-too-common origin story. We're going with Ethan's solution. The board liked his presentation better. Those were the words Ariana Blake, our CTO, delivered to me on a foggy San Francisco morning when I'd expected a very different conversation. Like maybe, congratulations on solving our platform's biggest scaling issue, here's your promised promotion. Instead, Ethan Morrison, who had been with Buzzcore for all of 3 months compared to my 2 years, was getting credit for my algorithm. The same algorithm I'd spent 4 months perfecting while Ethan perfected his golf swing with our CEO. But, that's my code, I said, immediately hating how pathetic I sounded. Ethan just put some flashy slides around it. Ariana's artificially sympathetic smile didn't reach her eyes. Tyler, this is how tech works. Ethan has the presentation skills we need for investor meetings. You're a brilliant coder, but you're more backend material. Backend material. Translation: keep building stuff for others to take credit for. The stock options package will make up for it, she added, already checking her Apple Watch. We're filing for IPO next quarter. Just hang in there. I nodded numbly, retreating to my desk surrounded by other engineers who were pointedly wearing noise-canceling headphones. Nobody wanted to witness someone else's career execution. Buzzcore was my third startup, and at 31, I was starting to see the pattern. Companies love quiet, competent engineers who solve problems right up until they need someone photogenic and smooth-talking to present those solutions to investors. I had joined Buzzcore when it was just 15 people in a converted warehouse south of Market. Now, at 200-plus employees and a $2.2 billion valuation, the company culture had transformed from "we're all in this together" to every executive for themselves. Our product, a social commerce platform, was growing exponentially, but the technical debt was piling up faster than our user base. My solution would have fixed our biggest scaling issue elegantly. Ethan's version, read, my code with his name on it, would work in the short term but create maintenance nightmares down the line. Not that anyone seemed to care about that during the pre-IPO frenzy. I slumped into my chair, opened Slack, and messaged my best friend and fellow engineer, Priya. Me, Ethan got credit for the scaling algorithm. Priya, what? That's your code. Me, apparently I'm back-end material. Priya, that's such BS. Coming over. Moments later, Priya appeared at my desk, her expression thunderous beneath her purple-streaked hair. At 28, she was already one of our most respected data engineers and the only person who consistently called out the company's increasingly toxic culture. This is straight-up intellectual theft, she hissed, keeping her voice low. You need to fight this. I shook my head. And then what? Get labeled not a team player? You know how this works. So you're just going to let Ethan take credit for months of your work? Work that will literally save this company millions? What choice do I have? I need those stock options. My dad's medical bills. Priya's expression softened. She knew about my father's Parkinson's diagnosis and the crushing healthcare costs that had wiped out my savings. There are other companies, Tyler. Better ones. Not with IPO potential this close, I sighed. I'll just document everything and keep my head down until we go public. 6 more months. Document everything, Priya repeated slowly, a strange glint appearing in her eye. You know what? That's exactly what you should do. I didn't recognize it then, but that was the moment the revenge plan was born. Not my plan, mind you, I was still thinking about those stock options and healthcare coverage. But sometimes the universe has different ideas about justice. Part 2, the accidental paper trail. Over the next few weeks, I channeled my frustration into doing what I've always done best, meticulous documentation. While Ethan paraded around with executives and potential investors, I quietly created the most comprehensive technical documentation Buzzcore had ever seen. Every function, every API call, every potential scaling issue was documented with painstaking precision. I created diagrams, performance metrics, and scenarios detailing exactly how the system would behave under various loads. I also documented, purely for engineering completeness, of course, what I called implementation divergences. These were the places where Ethan had modified my original solution, usually for aesthetic reasons that made the code look flashier in demonstrations but less efficient in practice. "Why are you putting so much effort into this?" asked Devon, a junior engineer on my team, watching me create yet another detailed flowchart one evening. "Because good documentation is the foundation of sustainable software," I replied automatically. "Yeah, but nobody reads docs here. Especially not the executives." I shrugged. "Maybe not now. But someday, someone will need to understand how all this works." Little did I know how prophetic those words would be. By the time our company all-hands meeting rolled around in late October, I had produced over 200 pages of technical documentation, all neatly organized in our internal wiki. I had also been methodically uploading all my original work, timestamps included, to a private GitHub repository, not for any particular reason, just good engineering practice. The all-hands meeting was held in our sleek new event space, designed to impress the tech media who were increasingly covering our rocket ship growth. Our CEO, Blake Davidson, a Stanford MBA with perfect teeth and a carefully cultivated visionary persona, took the stage to thunderous applause. Q3 was our biggest quarter ever, he announced, as charts with hockey stick growth appeared on the massive screen behind him. "We 4x'd our user base, 7x'd our transaction volume, and most importantly," he paused for dramatic effect, "we've solved our scaling challenges." My stomach clenched as Blake gestured stage right. "Please welcome Ethan Morrison, the architectural genius who's made our platform enterprise-ready." Ethan jogged onto the stage like he was accepting an Oscar, his artificially tousled hair and Patagonia vest completing the tech bro archetype. "Thanks, Blake. It was just a matter of approaching the problem differently," Ethan said with practiced humility. "My scaling solution leverages distributed microservices architecture with adaptive load balancing to ensure seamless performance even as we add millions of new users." Those were my exact words from my original proposal, the one Ariana had rejected 2 months ago. As the audience applauded, I felt Priya's hand squeeze my shoulder. "Breathe," she whispered. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled slowly, focusing on the exit sign rather than Ethan's continuing victory lap on stage. "We've already implemented Phase 1, Ethan continued, and I'm happy to report zero downtime during the transition. Phase 2 will roll out next week, just in time for the holiday shopping season." My head snapped up. Phase 2? There was no Phase 2 in my original design. It was meant to be implemented as a complete solution. Partial implementation would leave dangerous vulnerabilities. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the most recent code check-ins. Sure enough, Ethan had modified the deployment schedule, breaking my comprehensive solution into phases that would look better on a presentation timeline. "He's only implementing the load balancer without the data consistency protocols," I whispered to Priya. "That's going to create race conditions under high load." "What does that mean in English?" she whispered back. "It means if we get the traffic spike they're projecting for Black Friday, transactions could get duplicated or lost entirely." Priya's eyes widened. "Shouldn't you say something?" I was already drafting an urgent email to Ariana and the engineering leadership team, complete with references to my documentation showing why the phased approach would fail. I hit send just as Ethan was wrapping up his presentation to enthusiastic applause. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. "Tyler, I appreciate your concerns, but Ethan's team has thoroughly tested the phased approach. Let's not create confusion this close to the implementation date. I've forwarded your documentation to Ethan's team for reference, but please refrain from raising alarms without consulting with leadership first. Ariana Blake, Chief Technology Officer, Buzzcore Inc." I showed Priya the email, and her expression darkened. "Forward that to your personal email," she said firmly. "Right now." "Why?" "Because when this blows up, and it will, you'll need proof you tried to warn them." I forwarded it, still naively believing the worst that could happen would be some system downtime and a lesson learned for the leadership team. I had no idea I was documenting the beginning of the end. Part 3: The Inevitable Implosion. November 29th, Black Friday, started like any other day. I woke up, made coffee, and checked our system dashboards out of habit. Everything looked nominal. Our traffic was up 230% from the previous day, but the servers were handling it. Ethan's Phase 1 implementation, primarily my load balancing algorithm, was doing its job. It was around 2 p.m. when the first warning signs appeared. Slack, Buzzcore Engineering Channel. DevOps bot, alert, database replication lag exceeding thresholds on US East cluster. Ethan, monitoring. Probably just holiday traffic spikes. DevOps bot, alert, payment transaction queue exceeding processing capacity. Ethan, expected behavior. The queuing system will catch up. I stared at the alerts with growing unease. These weren't just traffic spikes, these were exactly the symptoms I'd predicted in my documentation when implementing the load balancer without the data consistency protocols. I quickly typed a message. These patterns match the race condition scenario I documented. We should fail over to the backup processing pipeline immediately. Ethan, we don't need to overreact. The system is scaling as designed. Over the next hour, more alerts flooded in. I watched in horror as our transaction success rate began to plummet. Customers were getting error messages. Some were seeing double charges. Others completed purchases but received no confirmation. Then came the social media storm. At Buzzcore just charged me 3 times for the same order. Hashtag Black Friday fail. Anyone else getting transaction failed but the money left your account? At Buzzcore your app is broken. These tweets multiplied rapidly, soon trending in tech circles. Our customer support queues exploded. By 4 p.m., the situation was critical. I joined the emergency Zoom call with the entire engineering leadership team, where Ethan was struggling to explain what was happening. We're seeing unexpected database contention, he said, his usual confidence evaporating. We're scaling up resources to compensate. That won't fix it, I said, unable to stay silent any longer. This is a race condition in the transaction processing layer. Throwing more resources at it will actually make it worse. Ariana's face appeared in one of the Zoom squares. Tyler, is there something you can do to help? The irony was almost too much. Yes. We need to implement the data consistency protocols from my original design. The ones that were documented as essential but weren't included in Phase 1. There was an uncomfortable silence. How quickly can you implement them? Ariana finally asked. 6 hours, minimum. And we'd need to temporarily shut down new transactions while we deploy. Blake, the CEO, who had been silently fuming, exploded. Shut down on Black Friday? Are you insane? Do you know how much revenue we're generating per minute? Do you know how much you're losing in failed transactions and double charges? I countered. Not to mention the brand damage from thousands of angry customers. The call devolved into chaos after that. Eventually, a compromise was reached. I would implement an emergency patch that might mitigate the worst issues without requiring a full shutdown. I worked frantically for the next 8 hours, essentially building a complicated workaround for problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. By midnight, we had stabilized the system enough to process transactions reliably, though at about 60% of our normal throughput. The damage, however, was done. Hashtag BuzzcoreFail was trending nationwide. Tech news sites were running stories about our Black Friday meltdown. Our App Store rating had plummeted. And somewhere in the chaos, someone had leaked screenshots of my original documentation, specifically the parts warning about exactly this scenario, to a prominent tech blogger. By Saturday morning, the narrative had shifted from Buzzcore's Black Friday technical failure to Buzzcore ignored engineers' warnings, leading to massive failure. I swear it wasn't me who leaked those documents. To this day, I suspect it was someone on Ethan's team who had access to my wiki and recognized what was happening. But the result was the same. My meticulously detailed warnings, complete with timestamps showing they predated the failure by weeks, were now public. The tech industry loves a David versus Goliath story, especially one with receipts. By Monday, I was being hailed as a whistleblower despite never having intended to blow any whistles. Part 4: The Fallout. The board has called an emergency meeting. Priya delivered this news over coffee the following Tuesday. She had inside information thanks to her friendship with our lead investor's technical advisor. Are they going to cancel the IPO? I asked. Possibly worse. There's talk of a full leadership audit. The SEC apparently has questions about technical disclosure in our IPO filing. I nearly choked on my latte. The SEC? What does this have to do with the SEC? Priya leaned closer. Apparently, our IPO paperwork claimed our platform had proprietary, fully tested scaling technology ready for enterprise volumes. But your documentation proves leadership knew there were unresolved critical issues. That's not on me, I protested. I never signed off on any IPO documents. No, but Ethan did. As did Ariana and Blake. And now there's documented evidence they ignored warnings about technical problems that could materially impact the company's performance. The implications slowly sank in. This wasn't just about a Black Friday failure anymore. This was about potential securities fraud. Later that day, an all-company meeting was announced for 3 p.m. The office was eerily quiet as we filed into the main space. There were no slides this time, no upbeat music, just Blake standing rigidly at the front with members of the board flanking him like grim sentinels. As you know, we experienced significant technical challenges during the Black Friday sales event, Blake began, his usual charisma notably absent. These issues resulted in approximately $15 million in transaction failures and customer compensation costs. A murmur ran through the crowd. More concerning is the revelation that these issues were predicted and documented, but this information wasn't properly escalated or addressed. Blake's gaze found me in the crowd, not angry but resigned. In light of these events, the board has decided to postpone our IPO filing indefinitely. The murmur became a roar. For many employees, including me, the IPO had been the light at the end of the tunnel, the moment our stock options would finally be worth something. Additionally, Blake continued, once the noise died down, there will be leadership changes effective immediately. Ariana Blake and Ethan Morrison are taking leaves of absence while we conduct a full technical and procedural audit. I felt dozens of eyes turn in my direction. I stared straight ahead, face burning. Tyler Chen, Blake said, my name sounding strange in his mouth, I'd like you to join the executive team in the conference room after this meeting. The rest of the announcement was a blur of corporate damage control. When it ended, I made my way to the executive conference room on shaky legs, feeling like I was walking to my own funeral. Inside, I found Blake, 2 board members I recognized as major investors, and a woman in a sharp suit who was introduced as external counsel. Tyler, one of the investors, began, your documentation has created quite a situation for us. I swallowed hard. I was just doing my job. Exceptionally well, it seems, said the other investor, a silver-haired venture capitalist named Richard. Too well for some people's comfort. Am I being fired? I asked directly. Blake looked pained. No, absolutely not. That would be legally inadvisable. The lawyer nodded in agreement. Mr. Chen, you've created a comprehensive record that puts you squarely in whistleblower protection territory, whether that was your intention or not. It wasn't, I said quickly. I just document everything. It's good engineering practice. And quite fortunate for our investigation, Richard said. We need to understand exactly what happened and who knew what when. Your documentation will be central to that process. Over the next 2 hours, they asked me detailed questions about my work, the scaling solution, and the warnings I'd provided. I answered honestly, occasionally pulling up files from my meticulous records to illustrate points. Finally, Blake leaned forward. Tyler, we'd like to offer you a new position. I blinked in surprise. What position? Interim Chief Technology Officer. The room spun slightly. I'm not qualified for that. You're the most qualified person at this company, Richard said bluntly. You understand the platform better than anyone, you've demonstrated exceptional foresight, and most importantly, you have documented integrity. Documented integrity, I repeated, somewhat dazed. Is that a thing? It is now, the lawyer said with the ghost of a smile. And it's exactly what we need during this audit period. They laid out the terms: a significant salary increase, accelerated vesting of my existing stock options, and a seat at the leadership table while the company regrouped. The IPO was delayed, but not dead. We'll announce the change tomorrow, Blake concluded. Unless you need more time to consider? Part of me wanted to laugh hysterically. Less than a week ago, I'd been backend material. Now they were handing me the technical keys to the kingdom. I'll do it, I heard myself say. But I have conditions. Richard raised an eyebrow. Go on. Priya Sharma gets promoted to lead data engineering. The entire engineering team gets retention bonuses to make up for the delayed IPO. And we implement a company-wide policy that all technical solutions must be properly attributed to their original creators. Blake winced at the financial implications, but Richard was already nodding. Reasonable requests that address the core issues that got us here, he said. Anything else? I thought for a moment. Yes. I wanted in writing that comprehensive documentation is now considered a core value of this company. Richard actually laughed at that. Tyler Chen, you may be the first engineer in Silicon Valley history to weaponize good documentation practices. Consider it done. As I left the conference room, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I'd never sought revenge against Ethan or Ariana. I'd never plotted to expose the company's flaws. I'd simply done what I always did: documented my work thoroughly and raised concerns through proper channels. And somehow, that had been enough to topple the house of cards. Part 5, The Legend. The tech industry loves a good story, and mine quickly became the stuff of legend. The engineer who documented his way to the top read one headline in TechCrunch. Silicon Valley's new revenge engineer shows power of paper trails, declared another. I gave no interviews and made no public statements, which only seemed to enhance the mystique. Buzzcore's PR team crafted a redemption narrative around the company's commitment to transparency and technical excellence, with me cast as the unassuming hero who'd been promoted based on merit. It wasn't entirely fiction. Over the next 6 months, I led a complete overhaul of our platform, implementing my original scaling solution properly and establishing rigorous code review and attribution practices. Our system stability reached all-time highs, and customer trust slowly rebuilt. Ethan never returned from his leave of absence. According to LinkedIn, he landed at a crypto startup as Chief Innovation Officer, a title that made Priya snort coffee through her nose when she saw it. Ariana did return, but in a diminished role overseeing a single product line. We maintained a professional relationship, though she never quite met my eyes in meetings. Blake remains CEO, though with the board exercising much tighter oversight. To his credit, he adapted to the new reality with remarkable flexibility, publicly championing our renewed commitment to engineering excellence. The IPO was rescheduled for 18 months later. When it finally happened, the technical stability we'd achieved helped secure a valuation even higher than originally projected. My stock options, along with those of the engineering team I'd insisted receive retention packages, became worth multiples of what we'd initially hoped. The night after the successful IPO, Priya organized a small celebration at her apartment for our core engineering team. As we toasted our success, she pulled me aside. "You realize you've changed things, right?" she said. "Not just at Buzzcore." "What do you mean?" "I have friends at 5 different startups who all say their companies have suddenly become obsessed with documentation and proper attribution. They're calling it pulling a Tyler." I nearly choked on my beer. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? You accidentally took down a toxic leadership structure and got promoted by simply keeping good records. That's like catnip for every underappreciated engineer in Silicon Valley." She had a point. In the months following our IPO, I received hundreds of LinkedIn messages from engineers at other companies, many sharing stories of implementing better documentation practices to protect themselves and their work. Several venture capital firms updated their due diligence processes to specifically review technical documentation and attribution practices. One prominent VC even created a documentation and attribution worksheet that founding teams had to complete before receiving funding. Had I started a mini revolution in Silicon Valley's approach to technical credit? Perhaps. But that had never been my goal. 1 year after our IPO, I finally accepted an invitation to speak at a major tech conference. Not about scaling algorithms or database optimization, but about documentation as a career strategy, a title I found both amusing and slightly embarrassing. Standing on stage before thousands of engineers, I felt distinctly out of place. I was a coder, not a motivational speaker. But I had a message to deliver. I never documented my work to catch anyone in a lie, I told the audience. I never did it to protect myself or to ensure I got credit. I did it because thoroughness is a virtue in engineering. Clear attribution and detailed explanations make systems more maintainable, teams more effective, and companies more resilient. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. But I've learned that documentation is also a form of truth-telling. And in environments where truth is inconvenient, simply recording facts can become a revolutionary act. The applause was thunderous, far more than I deserved for stating what seemed like common sense to me. Afterward, a young engineer approached me, clutching a notebook. "I've been documenting everything since I read about you," she said excitedly. My boss tried to take credit for my recommendation algorithm last month, but I had everything timestamped and witnessed. "What happened?" I asked. Her grin was infectious. "He got reassigned. I got promoted." As more people shared similar stories, I realized Priya was right. Something had shifted in the industry. Not everywhere, and certainly not completely, tech would always have its share of credit stealers and corner cutters. But for some, the balance of power had subtly realigned. The pen is mightier than the sword, goes the old saying. But in the digital age, perhaps the documentation is mightier than the org chart. Epilogue. 3 years after the Black Friday incident, I left Buzzcore to start my own company, a platform helping engineering teams implement better documentation and attribution systems. We called it Papertrail. Priya joined as co-founder and CTO. Our series of funding round was oversubscribed, with Richard from Buzzcore's board leading the investment. "You've identified a pain point that nobody was addressing," he told us at the closing dinner. "Technical attribution is the unspoken crisis in our industry." Plus, Priya added with a wink, "Documentation is sexy now, thanks to Tyler." I rolled my eyes, but secretly, I was proud. Not of becoming what tech blogs had termed a revenge engineer, I still maintained that revenge had never been my intention, but of helping create a culture where good work couldn't be so easily separated from its creators. Ethan Morrison occasionally crosses my radar via tech news. His crypto venture failed spectacularly, but he somehow failed upward into an executive role at a social media company. Some people's ability to reinvent themselves is truly remarkable. I sometimes wonder if he knows the role he played in changing tech industry practices. Probably not. Characters like Ethan rarely reflect on the consequences of their actions. As for me, I still document everything meticulously. It's just who I am. But now, instead of doing it alone, I'm teaching others the power of creating undeniable paper trails. My father, whose medical treatments I can now easily afford, finds the whole story hilarious. "Only you could get revenge without trying," he told me during a recent visit, his Parkinson's tremors less pronounced thanks to an experimental treatment we'd found. "You were always quietly stubborn." That's as good a description as any. Not a revolutionary, not a whistleblower, certainly not a revenge engineer. Just quietly stubborn about doing things the right way. And in a world that often rewards the wrong things, sometimes that's enough to change the game. The end.